September 18th, 1948. Bumpy Johnson stepped off a cargo ship in Naples, Italy, carrying one suitcase and no weapon. He traveled 4,000 miles to meet the most dangerous man in organized crime. Lucky Luciano, the man who'd built the modern mafia, the man who still controlled American operations from exile, and the man who'd just sent Bumpy an invitation that everyone in Harlem said was a death sentence. "Don't go," Stephanie St. Clair had told him the night before he left. "Luciano doesn't invite people to Italy for conversation. He invites them to make them disappear, where nobody will find the body." Bumpy had smiled. "Then I guess we'll find out if respect means anything." What happened over the next 3 days in a villa outside Palermo would reshape organized crime in America for the next 20 years. It would create the invisible boundary that kept the 5 families out of Harlem, and it would prove something most people didn't understand about power. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's knowing exactly what to say when everyone expects you to beg for your life. To understand why Bumpy Johnson flew to Italy in 1948, you need to understand what happened to Lucky Luciano. He was born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily in 1897, came to America as a child, and built himself into the architect of modern, organized crime. He eliminated the old mustache Petes, the traditional bosses who ran the mob like feudal kingdoms. He created the commission, the 5 family structure, the business model that turned street crime into a corporation worth billions. By the 1930s, Luciano controlled everything. Prostitution, gambling, labor unions, politicians. He was untouchable. Until 1936, when an ambitious prosecutor named Thomas Dewey built a case against him. Prostitution charges. Luciano got 30 to 50 years. But then came World War II. The U.S. Navy had a problem. German submarines were sinking ships in New York Harbor. They needed intelligence. They needed control of the waterfront. And the only man who could deliver that was locked in a maximum security prison. So they made a deal. Luciano would use his connections to secure the docks, provide intelligence, help with the invasion of Sicily. In return, after the war, they'd commute his sentence. Not freedom. Deportation. Back to Italy. Permanent exile. February 1946. Luciano arrived in Italy. 50 years old. Banned from ever returning to America. Separated from the empire he'd built. Most men would have faded into obscurity. Luciano wasn't most men. He set up operations in Naples, then Palermo. He couldn't set foot in America, but he could still control it. Through messengers, through intermediaries, through loyal associates who made the trip across the Atlantic to receive orders and deliver profits. The 5 families still answered to him. The commission still sought his approval. Lucky Luciano might have been in exile, but he was still the boss of bosses. Except for one problem: Harlem. Harlem had always been complicated for the Italian mob. The neighborhood was too black, too proud, too organized to be controlled the way they controlled Little Italy or the Bronx. They'd tried for decades. Dutch Schultz had tried in the 30s and failed. The families had tried after Schultz died and kept failing, because Harlem had Bumpy Johnson. By 1948, Bumpy controlled the numbers racket in Harlem independently. He didn't answer to the families, didn't pay tribute, didn't ask permission. He ran his operation like a sovereign territory inside New York City, and that drove Luciano insane. From Sicily, Luciano sent word he wanted to meet. Face to face, an invitation to Italy. Everyone who received invitations like that understood what they meant. Either you came back with a deal that favored Luciano, or you didn't come back at all. Bumpy's associates told him not to go. "It's a trap. He'll kill you in Sicily, where American law can't touch him. Make it look like an accident. You'll disappear and the families will move into Harlem before your body's cold." Stephanie St. Clair, the former queen of numbers who'd mentored Bumpy, was more direct. Luciano respects power, but he respects his own power more. You go to Italy, you're walking into his kingdom. He has 100 men who'd put a bullet in you just to prove their loyalty. Don't give him the opportunity. Bumpy listened to all of it, and then he booked passage on a cargo ship to Naples anyway. Because Bumpy understood something his associates didn't. If he refused the invitation, Luciano would see it as fear. Fear meant weakness. Weakness meant vulnerability. And vulnerable territories got invaded. But if Bumpy went, if he walked into Luciano's kingdom unarmed and unafraid, that sent a different message. That said he wasn't scared. That said he had something Luciano needed. That said, this wasn't a negotiation between boss and subordinate. This was a meeting between equals. September 18th, 1948. Bumpy arrived in Naples after 12 days at sea. He traveled in steerage, the cheapest passage available, surrounded by Italian immigrants returning home. No entourage, no bodyguards, no fanfare. Just a black man from Harlem in an expensive suit carrying one suitcase. A car was waiting at the dock, black Alfa Romeo. Driver in a crisp uniform who said nothing, just opened the back door. Bumpy got in. The drive to Palermo took 6 hours through mountains and small villages that looked like they hadn't changed in centuries. Bumpy watched the landscape, memorized the route, calculated how far he was from anywhere he could get help if this went wrong. The villa sat on a hillside overlooking the Mediterranean. White stone, red tile roof, gardens with lemon trees and fountains. Beautiful, isolated. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. Perfect place for a conversation nobody was meant to witness. Armed men everywhere, not hiding it, standing in the garden, positioned on the terraces, cradling Thompson submachine guns like they were expecting an invasion. Bumpy counted 15 before he stopped counting. Message received. This was Luciano's territory. These were Luciano's rules. A butler, old Sicilian man in formal attire, led Bumpy through the villa. Marble floors, Renaissance paintings, furniture that probably cost more than most Harlem buildings. Every detail calculated to impress, to intimidate, to remind visitors who had the power here. Lucky Luciano was waiting on the terrace. 51 years old, slicked back hair going gray, wearing linen pants and a silk shirt, smoking a cigarette in a holder, looking every bit the king in exile that he was. He didn't stand when Bumpy walked out, didn't offer his hand, just gestured to a chair across from him. You came. You invited. Luciano studied him for a long moment. Most men I invite don't come. They send representatives, lawyers, people who can negotiate without risking their necks. But you came yourself. You wanted to talk to me, not my representatives. Smart. Luciano snapped his fingers. A servant appeared with a bottle of wine, poured 2 glasses. You know why you're here? I can guess. Then guess. Bumpy took a sip of wine. Expensive. Probably older than he was. You want Harlem. You've wanted it for 20 years. Dutch Schultz tried and failed. The families tried after him and kept failing. Now you're in Sicily, running operations from exile. And there's one piece of New York you don't control. That bothers you. Luciano smiled. Not a warm smile, a recognition smile. It does bother me. You know how much money moves through Harlem? The numbers racket alone, 3 million a year, maybe more, and I don't see a dime. Because Harlem isn't yours. Everything in New York is mine. Bumpy set down his wineglass, except Harlem. The temperature on that terrace dropped 10 degrees. Luciano's smile disappeared. 2 of the armed guards stepped closer, hands moving to their weapons. But Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact, just sat there calmly, waiting. Luciano held up his hand. The guards stopped. You've got balls, I'll give you that, flying to Sicily to tell me what I don't control. Most men would be begging for their lives by now. I don't beg. Then what do you do? I negotiate. Luciano leaned back in his chair. Okay, let's negotiate. Here's my offer. You work for me. You keep running Harlem, but you pay tribute. 20% of everything. In return, I protect you. The families leave you alone. The cops leave you alone. You get to operate with the full weight of the commission behind you. No. No. I don't work for anyone. Not you. Not the families. Not anybody. Luciano's jaw tightened. You understand where you are. You're in my home, surrounded by my men, 4,000 miles from Harlem. from anyone who gives a damn if you disappear. You really want to say no to me here?" Bumpy leaned forward. "You invited me here to negotiate. If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. So let's stop pretending this is about threats and talk about what this is really about. You need something from me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting on this terrace drinking wine. I'd be in a hole somewhere in these mountains." For a moment, Luciano said nothing. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "You're smarter than I expected. All right, let's talk about what I need." He lit another cigarette, took a long drag. "I'm in exile. Can't go back to America. Probably never will. But I still run operations there through people I trust. The families, they're loyal, but they're also ambitious. They see I'm in Sicily and they start thinking maybe they don't need to answer to me anymore. Maybe they can expand, take territories, make moves without asking permission." He pointed the cigarette at Bumpy. "Harlem is test case. If the families can't take Harlem, a black neighborhood running independently, then they know I'm still watching, still in control, still the boss. But if they can take it, if they can move in without me stopping them, then I'm just an old man in Sicily telling stories about the old days." "So you don't actually want Harlem," Bumpy said. "You want the families to know they can't have it." "Now you're getting it." Bumpy sat back. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't about money. This was about power, about Luciano maintaining control from exile, about proving he could still enforce boundaries, even from 4,000 miles away. "So here's what I propose," Bumpy said. "Harlem stays independent. I don't pay tribute. I don't take orders. I run my operation my way. But publicly, it's understood that Harlem is off limits because you said so. The families can't touch it. Not because I'm too strong, though I am, but because you declared it protected territory." Luciano raised an eyebrow. "And what do I get out of this?" "You get proof that your word still matters. You get a territory in New York that exists because you allow it to exist. You get the families constantly reminded that there are boundaries they can't cross. And you get something else." "What?" "Someone in Harlem you can trust. Someone who owes you nothing but respects the arrangement. Someone who'll keep the neighborhood stable, keep the money flowing, and never give the families a reason to think Harlem is weak enough to invade." Luciano was quiet for a long moment, thinking, calculating, measuring the angles. "You're asking me to give up money to maintain respect?" "I'm offering you a deal where you lose nothing and gain everything that matters. You can't collect from Harlem anyway. You tried for 20 years. It cost you more in soldiers and lawyers than you ever would have made. But if Harlem stays independent because you allow it, then you control it without spending a dime. And if the families don't accept this," Bumpy smiled, "then you remind them who's boss. That's what you do, isn't it?" Luciano stared at him. Then slowly, he started to smile. "You flew 4,000 miles to tell me I should give you what you already have. No, I flew 4,000 miles to give you a way to turn your problem into your solution. Right now, Harlem is proof that you can't control everything. After this conversation, Harlem is proof that you can control anything, even by choosing not to." The silence stretched out. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. The Mediterranean glittered in the afternoon sun. The guards watched and waited. Finally, Luciano stood up, extended his hand. "You've got a deal. Harlem is yours. The families don't touch it. Not now, not ever. As long as you keep it stable, keep it from becoming a problem. It's protected territory." Bumpy stood, shook his hand. "And if someone from the families doesn't respect that, then they answer to me." They shook hands for exactly 5 seconds. When they let go, something had changed. The guards' postures relaxed. The tension evaporated. A deal had been made. A boundary had been drawn. "How long are you staying in Sicily?" Luciano asked. "I leave tomorrow." "Stay for dinner at least. I want to introduce you to some people. Let them see the man who negotiated his way out of my villa instead of being carried out." That dinner became legendary in mob history. Luciano introduced Bumpy to his inner circle. Old mafiosos from the Castellamarese War, Sicilian dons who'd been running crime families for generations. All of them expecting to meet a subordinate, all of them realizing they were meeting an equal. The message was clear. Bumpy Johnson had Luciano's respect. And in that world, respect from Lucky Luciano was better than money, better than muscle, better than anything except power itself. Bumpy left Sicily the next morning. The drive back to Naples, the cargo ship to New York. 12 days at sea to think about what had just happened. He'd walked into the lion's den unarmed and walked out with a treaty. When he arrived back in Harlem, word had already spread. Luciano had sent messages through his channels. Harlem was off limits, by order of Lucky Luciano himself. Any family that moved on Bumpy's territory would answer directly to the boss in exile. The families tested it once. 1949, a year later. Vito Genovese sent soldiers to shake down a Harlem numbers bank. They collected for 3 days before Bumpy got word to Luciano. One phone call from Sicily to New York. The soldiers disappeared. Genovese himself called Bumpy to apologize. It never happened again. For the next 20 years, that arrangement held. Bumpy ran Harlem independently. The families stayed out. Not because they were afraid of Bumpy, though they should have been, but because crossing that line meant crossing Lucky Luciano, and nobody, not even the most ambitious family boss, was willing to do that. That's why 10 years later, in 1958, when Bumpy made a phone call to Italy about Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra, Luciano listened. Because Bumpy had earned that access in 1948 when he flew to Sicily and negotiated like an equal. That's why, when Bumpy needed to stop a mob hit, he could pick up the phone and make it happen. Because he'd built a relationship based on mutual respect rather than fear or subordination. Lucky Luciano died in 1962. Heart attack at Naples Airport. He was 64 years old. Never set foot in America again after his deportation. But until the day he died, he enforced the Harlem arrangement. It was one of his last standing orders. Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson. The families don't touch it. When Luciano died, some of the families thought the deal died with him. They started making moves into Harlem, testing the boundaries, seeing if Bumpy was still protected, or if that protection had been buried with Lucky Luciano. Bumpy was 65 years old by then. He'd just gotten out of Alcatraz after 11 years. Some people thought he was finished, too old, too tired, out of touch after being locked away. They learned otherwise very quickly. But that's another story. The point is this. September 1948. Bumpy Johnson flew to Italy with nothing but his intelligence and his courage. He sat across from the most powerful mobster in the world and negotiated a deal that gave him everything he wanted while making Luciano think he'd won. That's not luck. That's not violence. That's mastery of power at its highest level. Most men would have brought guns. Bumpy brought an argument. Most men would have offered money. Bumpy offered logic. Most men would have begged for their territory. Bumpy offered a solution to Luciano's problem that just happened to benefit Harlem. And it worked. For 20 years it worked. Until Bumpy died in 1968, Harlem remained independent. Not because of guns or soldiers or violence, because one man flew to Sicily and proved that respect, real respect, is more powerful than any weapon. That's the Bumpy Johnson most people don't know. Not the enforcer, not the gangster, but the strategist who could walk into the enemy's stronghold and walk out with a treaty. The man who understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is sit down unarmed and start talking. September 18th, 1948. A black man from Harlem stepped off a boat in Italy. 3 days later, he'd rewritten the rules of organized crime in America, and he did it without firing a single shot. That's power. That's strategy. That's Bumpy Johnson. If this story showed you a side of Bumpy Johnson you've never seen before, hit that subscribe button. We're telling the untold stories, the moments that made him a legend, the genius that kept him alive when smarter men would have died. Drop a like if you understand that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's knowing exactly what to say when everyone expects you to beg. And in the comments, let me know, would you have flown to Sicily? Would you have taken that risk? Turn on notifications because next up, we're covering the night Malcolm X called Bumpy at 2 a.m. asking for protection, and what Bumpy did next saved Harlem's mosques from being destroyed. You don't want to miss that. Remember, respect isn't given. It's negotiated. And Bumpy Johnson negotiated his way to the top of the mountain.